So hello, hello, hello. Glad you're all here. The purpose of this assignment is to learn about Google Scholar. As I mentioned during class, Google Scholar is more than just a search engine for academic articles, although it is that as well. Google Scholar is by far the best tool for finding academic articles that are related to other articles that you have already read, and in finding articles that were either published before or after an article that you find particularly relevant. One of the major difficulties in looking for scientific articles is that despite the fact that they often have the major finding published as the title, and that they often have tags that kind of help orient you as to the subject matter, it's very often difficult to look at a single article and determine whether this article was influential in the field in which it was published. And if it was influential, or you just find it useful and want to know more, how do you find out how people have followed up on the work in that article? Because very often, if you like an article, you want to know what the same authors have published in the future, and what other people have read the same article and found it so useful that they cited it in the course of their own research. So let's go slowly through the various tools Google Scholar gives you. As part of this assignment, I'm going to ask that you make an account with Google Scholar. The name for this is a profile, or a Google Scholar profile. In order to do that, I believe you need to have a Gmail account. If you don't already have a Gmail account, I strongly encourage you to make one. So a Gmail account is not just for Gmail, Google's email provider, it's also for all of the other associated Google products, such as Google Drive, Google's cloud storage system, and it also gets you an account on YouTube in case you wanted to upload any videos. So making an account on Google Scholar is as simple as going to, let me just log out of this account now, log out. So here's what it will look like if you're logging in for the first time and making an account for the first time. You'll go to sign in. And here, there's already an option available for me because I've already signed in using this account. But in your case, you will select an option such as make an account or use another account. You'll sign up using an email address you have previously found. Or rather, you will click, create account, and go through the steps in order to create an account. Creating a Gmail account and a Google account in general is very useful because as a member of the university, you have access to a cloud storage through OneDrive and the UAlbany mail. But once you graduate, you won't have access to that. And many of you have already found out that having access to a cloud server to store documents is a useful way to kind of manage your documents, because having them on the cloud means that if your laptop or desktop computer falls into a bathtub, you won't lose all of your data forever because there will have been a copy of it uploaded to the cloud. Google Drive is Google's equivalent to the OneDrive that you get through the university, but it will persist even after you graduate. I also prefer Google Drive over OneDrive and use it despite the fact that I have access to OneDrive. Anyway, once you have created a Google account, you're able to make a Scholar profile. This is different than simply making an account with Google. To do that, we'll go to the main web page, hub for Google Scholar, scholar.google.com. Then, over on the top left, these three bars, by clicking them, you'll open up this left panel. This left panel will let you see your profile, and if you click it, you will be prompted to use it with the account that you've signed up with. Let me just sign in for the sake of this lesson. So once you have your Google account and you click the options that you saw me just click to get a Scholar profile, it'll take you here. This is a place where we just put in our affiliations for the purpose of getting good recommendations from Google Scholar, and just in case you ever do have a publication in your name, this is just a very bare bones profile where someone who sees that you've published something can go to see your university affiliation. So in our case, it will be University at Albany. It would rather be State University at Albany. You can include a verification email. And for this one, I recommend that you include your UAlbany email address. This is not going to be of particular concern until you actually have something to publish, but because you have a university affiliation, that's actually a great big advantage, because there are some places where you could conceivably submit a paper or publication where they would not accept just a non-university affiliated account. You would need to have, if you have a email associated with the university, that gives you permission to publish in some places that you might not otherwise have access to. So even though I asked you to make a Gmail account, so a Google account for the sake of this assignment, and just in general, sometimes a university account is useful. And then if you have a homepage or blog, include that. If there's areas of interest, I recommend that you leave it empty for now. So the first thing that it suggests is, based on your name, it suggests things that you may have published. In this case, it's recommending articles that were published by people who have names of either G. Fitzgerald or Greg Fitzgerald. None of those people are me. None of the publications on this list are my own. But if you happen to have publications, which I don't think many of you are liable to have, you can add them here. At this point, there isn't anything we can do, because in order to make the full Scholar profile, it wants you to select articles that you have submitted in your name. And if you haven't done that, this is as far as we can go. But having gone this far and making the profile is still useful, even though we can't finish the whole profile. So let's go back to this icon on the top left to open up this left panel. And let's look at this fourth option on the list called Alerts. What these alerts are email alerts. And specifically, they're email alerts that Google Scholar will send you when articles that have particular keywords that you select are added to their database. So for this email address, which is just an alternate email address I use for certain applications like teaching the class, I don't have any alerts set up here, whereas on my main Gmail address, I have many alerts set up. And these alerts will always make sure that the most recent relevant papers published in your field that have particular keywords relevant to your field will always come to you. They'll get sent right to your Gmail address. And that's a big advantage, because in general, you want to know what's been published recently, because it might be the most important. And even though more recently published papers are not always necessarily better than papers published in past years, they necessarily are working with more information and in many fields with better techniques. So let's create our first alert. Let's choose as an example, chosen at random. Let's say that we wanted to look for every paper that is studying aerobic exercise . Oops. So every paper that mentions aerobic exercise and specifically mentions aerobic exercise as these two consecutive words. And the fact that we want to be specific for looking at two consecutive words, aerobic exercise always in this order together, never just one or just the other, we use the double quotes around the term that we want to always appear in that order. We would get different results if we had done aerobic exercise without the quotes. But aerobic exercise is likely to get us lots and lots of results, way more results than we could possibly want. So in general, you want to make your alert to be pretty restrictive so that you're not sent hundreds of papers every week. In fact, Google assumes that you don't want to receive hundreds of papers, and the two options that it's going to give you are show up to 10 results in the email or show up to 20. It assumes you don't want to see hundreds. So make sure to make your alert more specific rather than more general. So let's say I was interested in aerobic exercise and brain health. Let's say that I was interested in those two particular things always together. So if I were to make an alert with aerobic exercise and brain health, both those pairs of terms, both of them in quotes, it would mean that I would receive an email alert every week whenever these articles and whenever an article that has both of these terms appears. You can choose any kind of combination of terms you want. Like what if you were interested in aerobic exercise and bone density? That's a potential option. Or aerobic exercise, bone density, and estrogen, which is a hormone in women that's related to bone density. All of these are possible alerts, and adding terms always means you're going to get more specific results in your email alerts, but you might miss some articles that don't have one of the search terms. So once you're ready and you're happy with the terms you used in your alert, you can click Create Alert. And you see that you've created one alert, and your alerts page now tells you the one alert that you've made so far. Here are the terms, and it says show up to 10 results. And what will happen is whenever an article is published with all of these terms, I will get an email, and that email will link to the article that has all of these terms. And if these are the terms that are relevant to my area of interest or specialty, this is fantastic to me because I will always make sure to see the most recent relevant results. So that's an example of an alert. There are other kinds of alerts you can make, of course, depending on your interest. Let's say you're interested in, I don't know, materials science or psychological counseling, whatever you want. If it is published in academic journals, Google Scholar indexes it in its database, and it will alert you if something is published with those terms. So I wanted to show you alerts first, because that is a relatively lesser known feature of Google Scholar, apart from its simple search function. But now let's go to its search function. Oops, I just went to the settings for a second by accident. But now let's go to Google Scholar. The main hub page is scholar.google.com, and here we are. Now, let's look for some examples. If you remember back to the Mendeley assignment, there were papers about the effect of lead on lead exposure to children, and how that early exposure to lead led to long-term cognitive effects in children, including lower IQ scores, lower ability to kind of succeed in school in general, lower socioeconomic status, all sorts of negative things. Now let's look up some search terms that would be relevant to this. If we look up lead, childhood, and cognitive, we see lists of results that have all of these search terms. The exact way that Google Scholar will sort these terms, if you just search like this, using the search bar feature that we just did, it'll be a lot like just a regular Google search, where Google will do its best using its algorithm to find what it thinks are the most relevant search results. But let's actually do something a little bit different. Sometimes we don't necessarily care about the most relevant, we care about the most recent. If we wanted to search specifically for the most recent results, we could go over here to this top right corner where it says year, click that, and it allows you to sort by date. So if we click sort by date, you see that the very first result is from 2021. That's not an accident. That's because it's listing all of the articles that have these particular search terms from most recent to least recent. So if I were to scroll down quite a bit, let's go to page 6. So on page 6, we're finally in the year 2020 because we started on page 1 in the year 2021, and we're going kind of backwards in time. So the first article up here, this is probably just published. Let's scroll down a little bit and let's find an entry, or rather a result, from Google Scholar search that has all of the icons filled out. And this is atypical for very new articles because they often do not have citations, and the citations that they have in the article haven't been indexed yet. So let's just go back. So instead of sorting by year, let's sort by relevance, which is the default. Here we go. Let's look at this very first reference, and let's look at the anatomy of this result. So this result, the title of the paper is what's in the blue text. This is similar to a normal Google search where the title of the web page is in this nice blue text. Fun fact about Google and their sort of process of creating their search algorithms is, this is not really a search algorithm point, but the particular colors that you see on these web pages, such as the blue and the green, and even like some of the background colors, these were like chosen based on very, very sophisticated sort of option selecting tests where they exposed people to randomly web pages that had slightly different tones of blue and green and other different colors, and saw how likely those small differences in colors of the text affected people's willingness to sort of click on ads. I think that was what they were originally interested in. But the colors, which seem like just arbitrary things, like you might think any blue would be just as good for the title of a web page shown on a Google search results, but apparently they tested many, many small tweaks in the colors, and they found that the particular colors you see now are objectively the most effective. That's some data science right there. So that was quite a digression. Let's just reorient. So we have our title, in this case, declining blood levels and changes in cognitive function during childhood, the Port Peary cohort study. That's the title of the article and also the title of the search result. Over here, you see the first couple of authors. If we look at the third search result, you see all of the authors because there are only 2 of them and their names are fairly short, B. Yang and G.A. Klum. But up here, you see that there's an ellipsis after the 4th author, after J. Burns, and the ellipsis implies there's more authors than just those 4, but Google cut off the list of authors because it was getting too long. Next to the authors, you find the journal name. In this case, the journal is JAMA. JAMA probably ought to be capitalized here because it's an abbreviation for the Journal of the American Medical Association. Just like with the authors, when the name of the journal is too long, such as in the second one, occupational and I don't even know what the rest of the journal's name is, but it starts with occupational and, it's cut off because it's too long for the search result line. After the journal, in this green text, this is the year of publication. So in this case, the first search result was published in 1998. And then next, it shows you the website that the journal is published at. In general, that's not all that important because you can always just click on the result and it'll take you to that web page. And so seeing that here is not too relevant. Next, what you see is a snippet of the article that contains terms relevant to your search results. So it's not showing you the first words of the article, such as the introduction or the abstract. It's showing you the part of the article that contains the keywords that you search for in the search book. And that's often just your way of, when you're looking through multiple pages of results in Google Scholar, your way of just ascertaining how relevant is this article. Often just by looking at the title, the year it was published, and a little snippet, and some other information down here that we'll get to in a moment, that will often be enough for you to kind of make a snap decision. This article might be relevant, or this article looks highly relevant, or this article is definitely irrelevant, depending on what kind of research question you're interested in and what you know about your own subject matter. So down here, we have a set of options. The first is something where you can save a particular article. And if you save an article, it saves to this part of your Google Scholar profile called My Library. Let's just quickly go there and see this article has been saved. I don't recommend using this tool too much because if you find an article is very relevant, you might as well download it to Mendeley right now, because if it's useful and there's a chance you'll forget about it, you may as well download it to Mendeley. Next, we have this little quote. This quotation thing is a way of citing an article quickly. Like if you click it, it gives you the citation associated with that article in multiple common journal formats, such as MLA, APA. APA is American Psychological Association, so it's of great relevance to us. But this is something that Mendeley does, and Mendeley does better. So once again, when citing for a research paper, I do not recommend using Google Scholar. I recommend using Mendeley. Next to this is something that is particularly relevant. It's called the cited by. So when you see cited by 182, what does that mean? That means that since this article was published in 1998, 182 other publications have cited this article in their publications. So since 1998, there have been 182 articles that have used this article as part of their own article, probably to kind of make a point or cite some information relevant that was discovered in this particular article. And then the next option is see different versions of this. This is not all that relevant, but I guess it's worth knowing. Because Google Scholar is kind of aggregating multiple databases, and multiple databases are kind of working with the same set of articles, you'll end up with some duplication, where Google Scholar will index multiple versions of the same article, and instead of just deleting one, leaving one sort of definitive citation, it will keep them all, but then have them clustered in this look at all of the versions. So that's just the basic anatomy of a Google Scholar result. The thing here, cited by, is where we'll go next. So not only is cited by just a useful indication of how popular the article has been or how influential it's been since it was published, it's also your way of figuring out what has been done in the field since this paper. Let's say that you found this paper by Tong et al., 1998, looking at blood levels in children in this period cohort study. Let's say this is the most relevant and interesting and potentially useful article you've ever seen in your life, and you want to know what these 182 people who have published papers since thought was so useful about it. By clicking on this, Google Scholar will show us all of the papers that have cited that paper that had this title in their reference section. This is very useful because if you find a paper that's especially relevant to your interests, you want to know what papers have cited it, because papers that have cited a paper that you find very interesting and relevant, those are the papers that you are likely to find very interesting and relevant as well, because they thought the same paper was worth citing. When you click on that cited by and are taken to this next page, these citations are ordered in a very particular way. So if we scroll down, we see that we know that there are going to be a total of 182 citations, because that's what it said under cited by. But Google Scholar helpfully organizes the citations that have used a particular result in order of most cited to least, most cited by to least cited by. So this very first result of a paper that has cited this paper, declining blood levels, etc. Is A. McMichael et al., 2006, Climate Change and Human Health, Present and Future Risks. This particular paper has been cited 2,526 times. Compare that to the 182 times the paper that we originally looked at had. This paper is considered much more popular and much more influential. The primary metric in terms of whether a paper had influence is how many times it's been cited. Because if a paper is cited, that's an indication that someone thought that it was worthwhile and worth following up on. And the second result has 2,424 citations. And oh look, I don't know if you remember from the article that I had you fill out with citations for our Mendeley assignment, but this was actually a paper that I asked you guys to cite as part of that assignment, Canfield 2003. So Canfield is a super famous researcher. He really put like the early exposure of children to lead on the map. This guy is a hero of public health. Without him, we would know hardly anything about the effect of environmental lead exposure in children. So this guy is a hero, and that's not really relevant to this assignment, but I wanted to shout him out. And down here, we see an article next on the list has just over 1,000 citations. So it goes from a high number of citations to lower, and we can expect on the 10th page of citations, we're down to articles that have been cited 18 times, 15 times, and one of the articles at the end of the 10th page has only been cited 11 times. So let's say that you don't want to, let's actually go back for a second to the very first page of results for this cited by, and we have our Canfield 2003 paper. Let's say we really care about this Canfield 2003 paper and we want to look at what other articles have cited Canfield 2003. We can click on the cited by there, and it takes us to another page where we're looking at the articles that have cited Canfield 2003, that paper. Let's say that we are interested in whether anyone has looked at the effect of socioeconomic status and lead exposure since Canfield 2003. There are two ways of doing this. The first way is you look through all 2,500 something results, and that would take a really long time. And Google Scholar recognizes this and gives you a great option, which is this little box here that says search within citing articles. So what that means is if we click this box, and we search within citing articles, like when you click the box, it actually has a little helpful message to indicate that's what you're doing. It means that when you search something like a term in the box, you will be searching among the 2,500 something papers that cited this one paper. So instead of looking at all of the papers in Google Scholar's database, you're actually searching within a subset of those papers that happen to cite Canfield 2003. So let's say we were interested in papers that followed up or cited Canfield 2003 that mentioned socioeconomic status. I'm putting it in quotes because I want both of those words to be together. It's a common term and I expect them to be together. If I search, all of a sudden we see all of the papers that have cited Canfield 2003 that contain the term socioeconomic status. And whereas the total number of papers that had cited Canfield 2003, if you recall, was somewhere near 2,500, Google Scholar tells us that within the subset of those papers that mention socioeconomic status is only about 523. So only about 1/5 or 20% of those papers mention our term of interest. So if we were to look through all of these papers, all 500 of them, because let's say we were interested in environmental lead exposure and socioeconomic status later in life, these papers would be very relevant to us. So not only did they find a paper that we expected to be relevant, Canfield 2003, relevant enough to cite, but they also mention specifically a term that is of interest to us. When you're searching within the citing articles, it defaults to the typical Google Scholar, just searching from a search bar, and it doesn't list the articles in order of most citations to least. That's only when you click on the cited by does it do that. I'm not 100% sure why, but let's say that you wanted to go a little bit further. And instead of looking through 523 articles, you wanted to look through only the articles published since, say, 2015. Because for some reason you only care about the articles published in the last few years. To do that, we'll take our cursor over to the top right and click on the years. Oops. So you can choose since 2017. You'll see in a second if we want to change that to 2015.